I've never told anyone the full story of what I found in that storage unit. Not my wife, not the police, though I did try, once, and I'll get to that. I've kept the photographs, all 437 of them, in a fireproof lockbox in my garage. Sometimes I think about burning them. Sometimes I take them out and spread them across the floor and try to find the one detail I missed, the thing that would make it all make sense. It never does. But I'm telling you now because I need someone else to know. I need to say it out loud. This happened in 2019. I was 34, living in a house I'd bought 2 years earlier in Cedar Falls, Iowa. A little Cape Cod on Tremont Street, built in 1952. White siding, black shutters, a detached garage that leans slightly to the left. I loved that house. It was the first thing I'd ever owned that felt permanent. My wife Ellen and I had been married 3 years. No kids yet. We were happy, genuinely happy, which I mention because it matters. Because what I found didn't come from anywhere in my life. It came from somewhere else entirely. I'd gotten into storage unit auctions as a hobby. Nothing serious, I'd go maybe once a month, bid on units that looked promising, flip whatever I found on eBay or at the flea market. It was meditative, almost. The surprise of it. You'd cut the lock, roll up the door, and there was someone's whole life compressed into 200 square feet. I tried not to think too hard about the people. About what had happened to them. Most of the units were just furniture and boxes of clothes. Sometimes you'd find something valuable, a vintage guitar, a coin collection. Mostly you broke even. The auction was at a facility called Secure Store on Highway 218, about 20 minutes outside of town. February. Cold enough that my breath hung in the air inside the unheated hallway. There were maybe 15 of us bidding that day, the usual mix of resellers and curiosity seekers. The unit I ended up buying, number 247, had been abandoned for 3 years. The previous renter was listed as M. Vance, no other information available. When they cut the lock and rolled up the door, I almost didn't bid. It looked like a waste of time. The unit was small, maybe 5 by 10. Against the back wall were 3 metal filing cabinets, the kind you'd see in an office from the 70s. Green, dented, unremarkable. In front of them, a wooden chair, oak, spindleback, the varnish worn off the armrests. A standing lamp with no shade. And boxes. Maybe a dozen cardboard boxes, some water damaged, stacked without any apparent organization. The auctioneer started the bidding at $20. I won it for $45. Nobody else seemed interested. I loaded everything into my truck that afternoon. It took 3 trips. The filing cabinets were the heaviest. I had to borrow a dolly from the facility manager, a woman named Patrice who watched me with a kind of detached wariness. I asked her if she knew anything about M. Vance. She checked her records. The unit had been rented in 2012. Payments had stopped in 2016. No forwarding address. No next of kin listed. Happens more than you'd think, she said. People just disappear. She said it like it was nothing. Like it was normal. I didn't open any of the boxes until that weekend. Ellen was visiting her sister in Minneapolis, and I'd set up a sorting area in the garage. I started with the filing cabinets. The first one contained tax documents 1987 through 1994, all in the name of Margaret Vance, with an address in Des Moines. The second cabinet held old magazines. National Geographic, mostly dating back to the 60s. The third cabinet was locked. I tried forcing it with a screwdriver, but the mechanism wouldn't budge. I made a mental note to find the key or drill it out later. The boxes were more interesting. Most contained what I expected: kitchen items, old books, a collection of ceramic birds that might have been worth something. But the fourth box I opened was different. It was heavier than the others, and when I cut the tape and folded back the flaps, I found photographs. Hundreds of them. Polaroids, mostly, but also some 35mm prints and a few larger format images that looked professionally developed. They were organized in manila envelopes, each envelope labeled with a date. The earliest was marked 2015 to 2003. The latest was 2016 to 11. I pulled out the first envelope and spread the photos across my workbench. They showed a house. A white Cape Cod with black shutters and a detached garage that leaned slightly to the left. It took me a moment. Maybe 2 moments. And then my hands started to shake. I was looking at my house. Not a house that looked like mine, my house. The same crack in the driveway. The same crooked mailbox. The same address numbers above the door. But these photos were dated March 2015. I didn't buy the house until August 2017. I stood there for a long time. The garage was cold, and my breath made little clouds, and I remember thinking, there's an explanation. There has to be. The previous owners. Someone who lived here before me, someone named Margaret Vance, took photos of the house. That was it. That was all. I picked up another envelope, this one dated 2015 to 2006, and opened it. And that's when I saw the first interior shot. The living room. My living room. But not as it looked when I bought the house, as it looked now. The blue couch Ellen and I had picked out together at the Furniture Mart in Waterloo. The print of Lake Superior we'd hung above the fireplace. The stack of books on the side table, including, I swear to you, the exact same Cormac McCarthy novel I'd been reading that week, the one with the torn dust jacket. But the photograph was dated June 2015. 2 years before I lived there. 2 years before I owned any of those things. I went through every envelope that night. I didn't sleep. I barely moved. I just sat on the cold concrete floor of my garage and looked at photograph after photograph of my own life. The kitchen with Ellen's yellow mixer on the counter. The bedroom with our quilt, the one her grandmother made. The bathroom, the tiny bathroom, with my toothbrush, my specific blue toothbrush, in the holder by the sink. All of them dated months, years, before any of it was true. And some of them were worse. There were photos of us. Of me and Ellen. Sitting on the couch. Eating dinner at the kitchen table. Sleeping. There's one photograph, dated September 2015, that shows Ellen standing at the bedroom window, her back to the camera, looking out at the street. She's wearing a green cardigan I bought her for Christmas in 2018. And her hair is longer. The way she started wearing it in 2019. I looked at that photograph for maybe an hour, trying to understand. Trying to make it fit into any version of reality I could accept. Let me be clear about something, because I know how this sounds. I know what you might be thinking. I checked the metadata on every photograph I could. I had a friend who works at the university's media lab examine the paper, the chemical composition of the Polaroid film. Everything was consistent with the dates written on the envelopes. The film stock used in the Polaroids was discontinued in 2016. The processing chemicals on the 35mm prints matched a specific Walgreens development formula that was phased out in early 2017. These photographs were old. They couldn't have been faked. Not easily. Not by anyone I could imagine. I didn't tell Ellen. I don't know why, or maybe I do. I was afraid she'd think I was losing my mind. I was afraid she'd want to move. I was afraid that if I said it out loud, it would become more real than it already was. Instead, I started investigating. I looked up Margaret Vance in every database I could access. I searched property records, obituaries, social media. I found fragments. A Margaret R. Vance who'd worked as a paralegal in Des Moines from 1985 to 2003. A marriage license from 1979, husband named Theodore, no children listed. A death certificate for Theodore Vance, dated 2002. And then nothing. Nothing after 2012. I went back to the storage facility. Patrice was working again. I asked her everything I could think of. Did Margaret Vance ever visit the unit? What did she look like? Did she say anything, leave any contact information, anything at all? Patrice checked her records. Margaret had paid in cash. Always cash. Had visited the unit irregularly, sometimes once a month, sometimes not for 6 months. The last visit logged in their system was November 2016. After that, nothing. The payments stopped. The letters went unanswered. Eventually, the unit went to auction. To me. I asked Patrice if she remembered what Margaret looked like. She thought for a moment. Older, she said. Maybe 60s, 70s. Thin. Always wore the same coat, a brown coat, like a trench coat, but heavier. She never made eye contact. She paused. Actually, there was one thing. The last time she came in, maybe October or November 2016, she asked me a strange question. She asked if we had any units available closer to the front. When I asked why, she said she might need to move quickly. That was her exact phrase. Move quickly. Patrice shrugged. I offered to show her some options, but she never came back. The photographs kept eating at me. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and go to the garage and look at them. I started mapping them out, trying to find a pattern, a sequence, anything that might explain how they were taken. And that's when I noticed something I'd missed before. In several of the interior shots, you could see the edge of a shadow. A shape at the periphery of the frame, consistent across multiple photographs. It wasn't furniture. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was the shadow of a person. Someone standing just outside the frame, holding the camera. I measured the angles. I'm not a photographer, but I understand basic geometry. Whoever took these pictures was standing inside the walls. I know how that sounds. I know it's not possible. But the angles didn't lie. The shot of the living room was taken from a point approximately 18 inches inside the east wall. The bedroom photographs came from behind the closet. The kitchen photos originated from somewhere inside the space between the ceiling joists. I checked and rechecked. The photographer was inside the structure of the house itself. I spent the next week examining every wall, every ceiling, every floor in that house. I used a stud finder, a borescope, a thermal camera I rented from the hardware store. I found nothing unusual. No hollow spaces that shouldn't be there, no signs of modification or hidden passages. The house was exactly what it appeared to be, a solid, well-built Cape Cod from 1952 with no secrets in its bones. And yet, I went back to the locked filing cabinet. This time I drilled out the lock. Inside, I found more envelopes. But these weren't labeled with dates. They were labeled with names. The first one I opened was marked Hendricks. It contained photographs of a different house, a ranch-style home I didn't recognize, somewhere flat and dry, maybe New Mexico. The photos showed the same thing. Exteriors, then interiors. Personal items. People. A family of 4, going about their lives, unaware they were being watched. The dates ranged from 1998 to 2003. There were 11 envelopes in total. 11 families. The earliest photographs were from 1987. The most recent were mine. Each envelope contained the same progression: exteriors, then rooms, then possessions, then people. Each set of photographs was taken over a period of months or years. And in each set, if you looked carefully enough, you could see the same impossible shadow at the edge of the frame. The same figure, standing in walls, in ceilings, in places where no one could stand. I tried to find the other families. I really did. The envelopes were labeled with last names only: Hendricks, Okonkwo, Whitfield, Chen, Morrison, Palmer, Reyes, Sullivan, Dvorak, Tanaka, and finally, Lindqvist. My name. I searched for each name combined with the locations I could identify in the photos. I found obituaries. I found missing persons reports. I found a news article from 2004 about a family in Tucson who vanished without explanation, leaving behind a house that was, quote, completely normal in every way. The family name was Palmer. I contacted the reporter who'd written that article. Her name was Dana Sutcliffe, and she was retired now, living in Phoenix. She remembered the Palmer case. She told me things that weren't in the article. Things the police had asked her not to print. How the Palmers' belongings were all in place: clothes in closets, food in the refrigerator, cars in the garage. How the doors were locked from the inside. How the neighbors reported seeing lights on in the house for 3 days after the family was last seen, moving from room to room, as if someone was home. But when police finally entered, no one was there. No one had been there. The dust on the floor was undisturbed. I asked Dana if she'd ever heard the name Margaret Vance. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Where did you hear that name?" I told her about the storage unit. About the photographs. About my house. She asked me to send her copies of everything. I did. A week later, she called me back. Her voice was different, careful, controlled, like someone trying not to panic. "I found something," she said. "In my old notes. A witness statement from the Palmer case that was never followed up on." The statement was from a neighbor, a man named Gerald Finch. He'd reported seeing a woman near the Palmer house in the weeks before the family disappeared. An older woman in a brown coat, walking slowly past the house at odd hours, always alone. He'd tried to talk to her once, asked if she was lost. She'd looked at him, looked through him, he said, and asked a question that made no sense to him at the time. She asked, "How long have they been in there?" He assumed she meant the Palmers. He said, 3 years, I think. And she nodded, and walked away, and he never saw her again. Dana and I talked for 3 hours that night. We tried to make sense of it, to build a theory that fit the facts. We couldn't. The photographs were impossible. The timelines were impossible. Margaret Vance, if that was even her real name, had been documenting families for at least 30 years, and at least some of those families had vanished without explanation. But here I was. Still in my house. Still alive. Still living the life in those photographs, the life that had been captured years before it happened. Why was I different? Why was I still here? I went to the police. I brought a sample of the photographs, not all of them, just enough to explain. The detective who took my statement was professional, patient, clearly skeptical. He examined the photos. He wrote down the names of the other families. He said he'd look into it. 2 weeks later, he called me back. The photographs, he said, didn't match any crime scene in their database. The families I'd named, he'd found no evidence of foul play in any of their cases. Some of them had moved. Some had died of natural causes. The Palmers, he admitted, were still officially missing, but that was a cold case from another state, another jurisdiction. There was nothing he could do. I asked him about Margaret Vance. He said he'd run the name. There were 17 Margaret Vances in the national database. None of them matched the profile I described. The one from Des Moines, the paralegal, had died in 2014. Heart failure. She was 78 years old. I looked up her obituary. The photo showed a woman with short gray hair and a gentle smile. I'd never seen her before in my life. But there was something in her eyes, or maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was seeing what I wanted to see, something that looked like she was keeping a secret. Here's where I should tell you what happened next. The confrontation, the revelation, the answer that tied it all together. But I don't have one. Nothing happened. Margaret Vance, whoever she was, whatever she was doing, had been dead for 5 years by the time I found those photographs. The storage unit had sat untouched for 3 years after the payments stopped. And I was left with 437 images of a life that hadn't happened yet, taken by someone who couldn't possibly have taken them, from angles that couldn't possibly exist. Ellen and I still live in the house on Tremont Street. I never told her. I've thought about it 1,000 times, how I'd start, what I'd say, what I'd show her. But what would be the point? The photographs prove nothing except my own inability to understand them. And I love her. I love our life. I don't want to introduce a fear into it that has no resolution, no enemy to fight, no precaution to take. So I keep the lockbox in the garage, and sometimes I check to make sure it's still there, and that's all. But I think about it. Every day. I think about the families in those envelopes. I think about Gerald Finch's question, how long have they been in there? I think about Margaret Vance in her brown coat, walking past houses, asking questions, taking photographs from places that don't exist. I think about what she was waiting for. What she was measuring. What happened to the families when the photographs stopped? Last year, I found something I'd missed. A single photograph, stuck to the back of another, hidden for years. It was dated 2017 to 2001, is 7 months before I bought the house. It showed the living room empty, the way it looked when the previous owners moved out. But in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a woman. Older. Thin. Wearing a brown coat. She was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, and she was looking directly at the camera. At herself. At whoever was taking the photograph from inside the wall. Her face was calm. Patient. Like someone who had been waiting a long time and didn't mind waiting longer. And her lips, if I look closely, if I use a magnifying glass and the right light, her lips are moving. She's saying something. A single word, maybe 2. I've stared at that photograph for hours. I've tried to read her lips, to understand what she's saying. The closest I can get, and I'm not sure, I'll never be sure, is not yet. I check the walls now. Every few months, when Ellen is out, I take out the thermal camera and scan the house. I've found nothing. No hidden spaces, no anomalies, no signs that anyone has ever been inside the structure itself. But I've started noticing things. Small things. A creak in the ceiling at 3 in the morning that sounds like footsteps. A draft from the bedroom wall that comes and goes without explanation. The feeling, sometimes, of being watched from very close by. From inches away. I don't know what's in the walls of my house. I don't know what Margaret Vance was doing, or why, or how. I don't know if I'm still being photographed right now, from somewhere I can't see, by someone who's been there all along. I don't know if there will come a day when the photographs stop, and something else begins. I only know what I found. And I'm telling you now because I need someone else to carry it. I need it to exist outside my own head, in case I'm not here to tell it later. The lockbox is in my garage. 437 photographs. 11 families. 30 years of documentation. If something happens to me, if you hear that a family on Tremont Street in Cedar Falls has disappeared without explanation, doors locked from the inside, lights moving from room to room, I need you to find it. I need you to keep looking. I need you to understand what she was waiting for. What she meant by not yet. And if you live in an old house, a house that creaks and settles, a house with walls thick enough to hide things, I want you to do something for me. Tonight, before you go to sleep, stand very still in the center of your living room. Close your eyes. And listen. Not for sounds, but for silence. For the specific quality of silence that means someone is holding their breath. Because I've learned something from those photographs. I've learned that some things don't need doors to get in. And some things are patient enough to wait for years, for decades, watching from inches away, until whatever they're waiting for finally arrives. I checked the photographs again last week. The ones of me and Ellen. The most recent ones, dated November 2016. And I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the photograph of Ellen at the bedroom window, the one where she's wearing the green cardigan I bought her for Christmas in 2018, there's something outside. In the glass. A reflection I dismissed as a smudge or a flaw in the image. But it's not. It's a face. Not Ellen's. Not mine. Someone else. Someone standing in the room behind her, just out of frame, watching her watch the street. I've looked at that reflection for hours. I've tried to make out features, details, anything that might tell me who it is. But it's too blurred. Too distant. All I can see is the shape of a head, the suggestion of shoulders, and what might be, I'm not sure, I'll never be sure, the edge of a brown coat. Standing where I stand every morning. Watching my wife. Waiting. The photographs end in November 2016. That's the last date on any of the envelopes. But I bought the house in August 2017. I've lived here for years now, and nothing has happened. Nothing visible, nothing I can point to. So either the pattern has broken, or it hasn't finished yet. Either Margaret Vance stopped watching, or she never stopped at all. Either I'm safe, or I'm still inside the frame, still being documented, still waiting for whatever comes after the photographs end. I sleep less now than I used to. Ellen's noticed. She thinks it's work stress, and I let her think that. But the truth is, I lie awake listening to the house. To the walls. To the spaces between things. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes I hear something that might be a shutter clicking. A soft, mechanical sound, like an old camera advancing its film. And I tell myself it's nothing. I tell myself it's the house settling, or my imagination, or the echo of my own fear bouncing back at me from the dark. But I don't believe it. I haven't believed it for a long time. Because I've seen the photographs. I've held them in my hands. I've traced the impossible angles, measured the impossible distances, looked into the faces of 11 families who were watched without knowing, documented without consent, and then in some of them, at least erased. And I keep coming back to one question. The question that keeps me awake, that sends me to the garage at 3 in the morning, that makes me check the walls again and again. The question Margaret Vance asked Gerald Finch all those years ago, standing outside the Palmer house in her brown coat, looking through him like he wasn't there. How long have they been in there? She wasn't asking about the family. I understand that now. She was asking about something else. Something that moves through houses like water through pipes, like electricity through wires. Something that lives in the spaces we can't see, the gaps between walls, the voids beneath floors, the dark places that exist inside every structure we build. She was asking how long they'd been feeding. How long until they were full. How long until they were ready to take whatever it is they take. And that's the part one can't stop thinking about. Margaret Vance wasn't the threat. She was the witness. She was documenting something she'd discovered, something she'd been tracking for 30 years across 11 families in God knows how many houses. She was trying to understand it, to predict it, to maybe even warn someone. But she died before she could finish. Before she could tell anyone what happens when the photographs stop. Before she could explain what not yet becomes when the waiting is finally over. I still live on Tremont Street. Ellen and I are still happy, most days. The house is still standing, white siding, black shutters, the garage leaning slightly to the left. And inside the walls, in the spaces I can't see, in the dark places that exist just inches from where I sleep, something is watching. Something has been watching for years, for decades, maybe longer. Something that Margaret Vance understood and I don't. Something patient. Something hungry. Something waiting for a signal I can't predict, a moment I can't prevent, a transformation I can't imagine. I check the photographs one more time before I go to bed. The last envelope. November 2016. The last image in the sequence. It shows our bedroom at night, the sheets pulled back, two shapes under the covers. Me and Ellen, sleeping peacefully, unaware. And at the edge of the frame, in the shadow that shouldn't be there, the shadow that comes from inside the wall, something is different. The shape has moved. It's closer now than in any of the earlier photographs. Closer to the bed. Closer to us. As if it's been approaching, inch by inch, frame by frame, for years. As if the next photograph, the one that was never taken, would show it finally reaching us. That photograph is dated November 17, 2016. Margaret Vance died on November 23, 6 days later. 6 days after taking the last photograph. And I don't know if she stopped because she died, or if she died because she stopped. I don't know if documenting us was protecting us somehow, keeping whatever lives in the walls at bay. I don't know if her death was the signal. The permission. The beginning of the end. I'm going to stop now. I've told you everything I know, which is almost nothing. I've shown you the edges of a mystery I can't solve, a threat I can't name, a future I can't prevent. And maybe you think I'm lying, or crazy, or making connections that don't exist. That's okay. I've thought all those things too. But if you remember anything from this story, remember the photographs. Remember the angles. Remember that some things don't need doors. And remember to listen, really listen, to the silence in your walls. Because they might be in there right now. They might have been there all along. And the only question that matters, the only question Margaret Vance was ever trying to answer, is the one I still can't shake. The one I whisper to myself every night as I lie in bed, listening to the house breathe around me, waiting for the click of a shutter that may never come, or may come tonight, or may have come already without my knowing. How long have they been in there? How long until not yet becomes now? And when the photographs finally stop, when the documentation ends and the waiting is over, what comes next? I don't know. Margaret Vance never told me. And I'm so afraid that one day soon, I'm going to find out.